Welcome to Global Civics. We're not featuring a roundtable discussion per se in this episode. It's difficult to get folks in Montana into a television studio in the summertime. It's also been a little bit difficult to get public officials on the record on this topic of climate change. No matter, as you'll see and hear, we have assembled a number of voices and views on the topic of adjusting to climate change. And the emphasis is clearly on agriculture and water. To get things started, we're going to have a conversation with Representative Riley Neal here in the Capitol.
I'm a freshman legislator. I served my first term in the Montana State House in the 2013 legislative session. And I was unsure when I came to the State House what exactly working in the Montana State Legislature would be like, or what I would actually be capable of doing. I ran on a campaign and a platform to build agricultural security in the state in consideration of coming climate changes. And eventually, in my work in the State House, I was able to bring a resolution, a study resolution, to the State Agricultural Committee towards the end of session. And that was a resolution to really protect the agricultural industry in the state of Montana. The ag industry in Montana is the #1 industry, economic industry in the state. So if we were going to be looking down into looking into the future and seeing there might be some challenges in this industry due to climate variability, then we should probably assess those challenges and see what we might be able to do to prepare for a future that might not have the same climate stability that we have today, or that we've seen over the last at least 100 years. And one way that I thought we could approach this in the study was to look at water use in the state. We have been in a persistent drought for many years here in Montana. Some areas have experienced deluges, floods, extreme weather events, extreme climate events in a more consistent manner over the last 10 or 15 years. And this is being, and even 20 to 30 years, and this is being documented by many scientists at both Montana State University and the University of Montana. And this information and this data is available to all individuals who are interested, but it's difficult for them to track it down. And as far as the state is concerned, it's difficult to get any of this information into state policy because of politics. And so to kind of take politics out of the equation and work from a more science-based perspective, I brought forth this House Resolution, Joint Resolution 28, to the Ag Committee, as I had indicated, and it was to look at the future of water use and agriculture, and to look at ways to build resiliency into the system. I brought in a number of individuals, Dr. Kelsey Jensko, who is our state climatologist, works out of the University of Montana. I brought a number of stakeholders in to speak to the committee about how this issue is something that is going to play a part in Montana's future and in the future of agriculture in the state of Montana. And unfortunately, that bill was tabled in committee and was voted down on party lines. Water is like gold in the state of Montana. It's something that we're looking at constantly on the Water Policy Committee, and in particular with looking at climate variability, or assessing how water supplies, how water use in the future will look if there is a wide range of climate variability. Looking at that, we have to assess whether it's going to affect all sectors of our lives, and especially in the policy of the state of Montana's government, health and human services, disaster preparedness, everything from transportation to, of course, agriculture, water policy, natural resources. When these individuals presented the information in the panel study to the Water Policy Committee, it was apparent that we are seeing trends towards persistent drought, to more frequent climate events or disruptive climate events, floods and extreme droughts, and that these are things that we will need to prepare for in order to shore up our agricultural sector. There are a number of entities in the state of Montana at universities and within state departments who do look at this issue. The governor has a drought committee. I think there's the Water Resource Center at Montana State University, and of course the State Climate Office at University of Montana. These entities don't often work together. There isn't an umbrella organization that oversees them all and ensures that they share information, nor is there somewhere they all report to share information. This will continue to be a challenge without, say, a state climate office. Sometimes the data from the different universities is not shared, and when we could make even more progress in preparing for very likely severe climate variability in our future in the state, these entities are working independently. And it was my hope with this study resolution that we may create some kind of office or utilize an office already in existence to bring these entities together, or at least facilitate their working together a little more, and perhaps that's something that we'll see in the future. I hope so. It's an issue in the state of Montana that is only going to be exacerbated by the passage of time as our climate continues to warm and change, and we continue to be dependent on clean water for agricultural and other uses in the state. So I hope that at least the beginnings of this study resolution and the work being done by the other entities in the state can continue to push us in the direction of preparation and building resiliency into our systems as a civilization and as the state of Montana. I would hope that we would use the current data that we know about things going on, say this spring, when we see drastic climate events this spring or next spring, or in the summer when we see more drastic, epic and historic wildfires. When we see these things happening, that the individuals who are working to enlighten the public use these opportunities to tell the public this is happening now. It's not going to happen tomorrow, or it's going to continue to happen and exponentially get worse, however you define worse, but exponentially it's going to continue to happen. There will be more and more climate variability.
Representative Neal mentioned the Water Policy Interim Committee, a nexus for information exchange. Backing up in time and into this hearing room, we're going to hear from a representative very briefly of the state's Climate Data Center.
I study the surface atmosphere exchange of water, that would be evapotranspiration, trace gases like carbon dioxide, and energy from the surface to the atmosphere. My students have been working on eddy covariance measurements of evapotranspiration in the Judith Basin in a project that was funded by the Montana Wheat and Barley Committee, as well as the Montana Institute on Ecosystems. But instead of focusing on their data, which are forthcoming and very interesting so far, I'll be talking about the climate of Montana over the past half century from a hydrological perspective, and I'll be placing it in the context of global trends, so that when you hear about climate in the news and the media, global trends in climate, is that applicable to Montana or not? You know, how are we similar, how are we different to what's happening across the globe? And the motivation for what I'll be talking about speaks back to what Kelsey was talking about regarding dialogue. How when you have people coming from different backgrounds, either as environmental managers, legislators, members of the public, scientists, how can everybody come together to best understand our world?
We're going back outside again to a rally here at the Capitol on a rainy spring morning.
So thank you all for standing up for climate change solutions today. 13 other locations, or 13 locations in Montana, are experiencing these same celebrations today, are committed to this cause. Citizens from all walks of life. We've got over 80 business sponsors working today. We have groups representing Native Americans. We have groups representing conservationists, clean energy, recreationists, sportsmen. We've got a ski hill involved. And many, many more. All of our diverse groups have come together today with one unified message. Montanans want climate solutions, and they want them now.
I'm here today, standing here before you all, not to give a speech, but rather the motivation coming from me, a 15-year-old girl, to make a difference. Climate change is affecting our homes, our communities, and overall life in general. Houses being carried away by floods, famine impacting one of the most basic and essential needs to our living. I want to be clear. We have a vital role to play with unique responsibilities, hopes and dreams of succeeding generations. That is what is at stake. Do what you can, where you are, with what you have. That's what Teddy Roosevelt said, and that is what we are here to do today. Thank you.
My passion in this realm is buildings. I like designing them, building them, fixing them to become more energy efficient and human friendly. This is low-hanging fruit. A lot of the things, your power bill could probably be half of what it is with just some simple fixes. It's worth talking to the experts. It's really worth it. The payoffs are super fast. It's a great investment.
I'm going to focus on agricultural implications of climate change and things we can do about it. But first, I want to share with you my perspective of what the problem is. And I would start by asking, how often have you heard the mantra by agricultural corporations, politicians, and the likes of Farm Bureau when they say we have the most abundant, least expensive, and safest food supply in the world? Let us examine this misleading proclamation. Yes, our food is abundant, but we waste approximately 40% of it, which most ends up in landfills producing methane gases. Consider that our two largest crops, corn and soybeans, are principally grown to feed livestock and not humans. Our food is inexpensive for sure, given the relative cost of food to income amongst other countries. However, it comes at many externalized costs. Consider, for instance, the application of massive amounts of petroleum-based fertilizers across the farmscape. So what can be done to make our food system more climate-friendly? Let us work toward restructuring our food system with the goal of reversing climate change through photosynthesis and biology. We could sequester virtually all the current annual CO2 emissions produced in the United States with a switch to inexpensive, organic, and regenerative management practices. Over half of the equation would depend upon eliminating confinement feedlots and raising livestock on pasture. By putting emphasis on the growing of cover crops for plowdown, residue mulching, composting, food and agricultural waste, and serious crop rotations to enhance soil fertility, we can eliminate the need for synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and prescriptive GMO management practices. It isn't rocket science. In fact, it's simple. It's an elegant solution for converting greenhouse gases into food-producing assets. It's about our health. And here's what you and I can do to make it happen. Use your food dollars. Purchase organic foods. Get to know your farmers. Buy local family, grown by local family farms. Buy in season. Buy foods with low carbon footprint. Foods that don't require so much of petrochemicals and petrol fuels and such. Lentils, for instance, and dry edible beans, vegetables, nuts. Those are all low carbon input foods. Take charge of where your food comes from and how it is grown and raised. Conscientious consumption will likely have more impact than anything else you can do on a personal basis to reduce your carbon footprint. And lastly, I implore you to do what John Prine recommended we do many years ago when he said, grow a little garden.
I'm here on behalf of Montana solar installers, wind energy technicians, and the engineers, the electricians who are building climate solutions right here in Montana right now. I'm here on behalf of those businesses to call on our senators, our congressmen, our governor, our legislature, to admit the stark reality of climate science and to support and embrace the businesses who are building climate solutions and building a clean energy future in Montana. And when I talk about building a clean energy future, I'm not talking about bridge fuels, I'm not talking about clean coal. We don't have time to keep investing billions in oxymorons. It's time for an energy policy where efficiency comes first, renewable energy takes care of the rest.
Next, we're going to leave the Capitol Arena and head over to Carroll College, where Professor Steve Running from the University of Montana gave a lecture on climate change to an assembly of students, faculty, and local residents. Dr. Running is a member of the Intergovernmental Climate Change Committee.
I really find that the climate science is in. And to me, it isn't very well, I can't say it's not very interesting, but there's nothing new in it that I'm seeing anymore. And what I see that is getting exceedingly interesting is how humanity starts to make their choices of what to do. What I want to take you through is a bit of a look backwards up till now, in a broad sense of which climate is a component, but not the only component. One of my favorite slides is this one, and it's called the Great Acceleration. And of course, each one of those teeny graphs you're not even supposed to be able to read. You can sure come up afterwards and read every one of them. What it is a measure of many, many types of human activities. Everything from the number of McDonald's restaurants on Earth, to the amount of fresh water use, to, of course, the human population, the number of miles of car travel per year, all sorts of measures like that. And the real point of this is, every one of these measures you see just shooting up exponentially over the last half century. And in fact, this little cartoon, I think, is a great summary of the global state of affairs right now environmentally. And between the 40 years from 1960 to 2000, population doubled. Population has tripled in my lifetime, and I'm not that old of a guy, and tripled in my lifetime. Global economy has gone up sixfold. Food production has more than doubled. Fresh water use has more than doubled. Forest harvest for forest products is tripled. The number of dammed rivers worldwide has gone up fourfold. These are just a few of these metrics, and of course, down there in the corner is the little squeaky voice, and the world hasn't gotten any bigger at all. The poster child of all of these environmental metrics from the climate change point of view is this one, the Mauna Loa CO2 curve that was started in 1958. Charles David Keeling, riding up the chairlift with me a number of years back, started it. He was a Montana part-time resident. He had a ranch that went back 60, 70 years in the Bitterroot Valley. And he's the most eminent earth scientist on the planet. His name is known by every earth scientist. In the beginning, they had no idea what to expect. Nobody had measured CO2 accurately enough to even have any idea whether it was 300 parts per million or 700 parts per million. An interesting part of this graph is how it seesaws up and down every year. And you know, that's because the global plant growth is strong enough to actually reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere by a certain fraction. All the photosynthetic activity of the summertime draws CO2 down a couple of parts per million, and as we get to this time of year, it starts to be released back in respiration and decomposition. But it's interesting that Keeling himself, when he wrote these words in 1968, he didn't think this was going to become a big issue anytime soon. It was a curious scientific fact, but he wrote, the rise in CO2 is proceeding so slowly that in our lifetimes we'll probably never worry about it. Probably the most obvious signal of climate change for us around here is our melting glacier. And my friend that does the glacier measurements at the park says by 2020 actually there'll be no functional glaciers left. And so we're only about a decade away of the end of the glaciers in the park. And this is true of 95% of the glaciers on Earth. We may actually run out of irrigation water in a number of areas. Now luckily on this map, Montana doesn't look too bad. This is groundwater depletion rate over the last decade. Would you believe they measure groundwater with a satellite? They measure wobbles in the Earth's gravity field with such precision that they can tell when groundwater is depleted. In our part of the world, we may be winners on this one. It serves to remind us that even maintaining the agricultural production we have now is not a gimme. That just keeping up what we're already doing, we cannot just assume is automatic. And irrigation water for our end of the world is probably the single biggest issue there. The climate models project Montana will be about 5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer, say in another half century. They do not project that we'll be getting any more summer rainfall than we get now. I see progressive tension between the water in the river folks, the particularly water for energy development folks, and the water for agriculture folks. And they all think they deserve, what, more than their share. And so here's career path one. If you want to be a water rights lawyer, I highly recommend it. This has been the Western culture forever, and yet we see it's going to do nothing but get even worse than it is now. We have river after river that there are way more water rights allocated than molecules in the river. So how's this all going to come out in the end? So that the water management, water rights, water policy, there is just an endless array of career options right there. The good news is that any of you that have farmland, you've got it made. I think agriculture is going to win in the end for sure. This is the global food price index, and you'll notice it's doubled in the last 20 years. And when I see 2 billion more people wanting to eat breakfast every morning and no more land being mobilized, I think agriculture, boy, if you got farmland, don't sell it and buy more as soon as you can. And I really think that's going to be one of the places that Montana can do well if they strategize correctly. So now let's take a look at energy. And of course, as a climate scientist, I start with CO2 emissions of the world. And you'll see this doesn't even go back to when Dave Keeling started. This just goes back to 1990. And you see particularly in the last decade just an explosion of CO2 emissions worldwide. This is collectively everybody. We do have an effective way of limiting carbon emissions. It's known as global financial collapse, and that's what leveled this off for a year. And I suppose that's an option that could still occur. I don't kid myself that if humanity doesn't collectively wake up on a lot of these issues, that's in the cards for the future. So this is how our emission path's going. It's going up every single year. For all the reports that us climate scientists write, it doesn't seem to be making much impact. There's a very interesting agency called the International Energy Agency, IEA, is in Vienna. And if any of you are interested in global energy policy, it used to be kind of a rubber stamp outfit for the oil industry, and it's not anymore. It's really a quite, in my mind at least, a quite politically neutral assessor of energy options. And this is what they see the world could do to stabilize carbon emissions by 2020, which would be a magnificent feat. And so I just got this about a month ago. So what's on here? Partial removal of fossil fuel subsidies. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. Reducing methane releases. Out there in the Bakken now, as they're fracking like mad, the methane off-gassing is just huge. And it's even worse in other parts of the world where they can't get any of that gas to market, and so they just burn it off. You can see it from satellites. And so one of the things IEA is suggesting is this. Look at that. That's about a quarter of the way to stabilizing emissions simply from capping methane releases. Third is shutting down coal-fired power plants, and I'm going to have more about that to say soon. And then finally, a whole set of energy efficiency measures. These are all things that are not only possible, that can be done without any real impact on economic growth either, and that's exactly the point they make in their study. So let's see some of the details behind that. Well, first, where's all the emissions growth coming from? This graph shows it right in spades. Oil growth is drifting up. Gas has spiked up a little bit, but when you look at that last decade, what is it? It's almost all coal. Coal is now 43% of the carbon emissions by humanity. 43%. One of the things we know is an awful lot of those carbon emissions for electric power production we wouldn't even need if we paid more attention to energy efficiency in our buildings. And most of electric power production is for building, heating, cooling, and lighting. And every building in the country, every building on Earth virtually, could do way better if we put our minds to it and put our investment in it. I mean, I could probably easily walk around this building and point out lots of things that would be better if we were willing to invest the money in it. And if we were not using that electric power to begin with, then an awful lot of those power plants just plain would be surplus and just wouldn't be needed. Now, looking at coal specifically, and I think that global graph shows it all, that the biggest carbon emission source on Earth is burning coal for electric power, by the biggest worldwide. Now in the US we're starting successfully to whittle that down. So coal was 51% of our electric power production only 5 years ago, and it's now down to 37%. So we're heading in the right direction with our coal-fired power in the US. And of course what the power industry is doing is lopping off the oldest, least efficient ones first, which is exactly what they ought to do. And so we're really taking off some very antiquated systems right now. I think something like 150 coal plants have been closed in the US in the last 3 years. And so they are working their way from the bottom up at the worst of these old power plants. And it shows in the numbers for the US. But unfortunately, if the solution, if you can't burn it here, is to put it on a train and a barge and send it to Asia, then we haven't gained one thing at all, not one. It's all the same atmosphere. And I saw this paper just a couple of weeks ago. They can identify mercury toxicity in fish in the middle of the ocean coming from burning coal in Asia. So now the fish you eat at a restaurant, if you eat a high trophic level fish like a tuna in a restaurant, you could be eating Asian coal mercury. And of course, what's completely ironic is if we're the ones sending them the coal. This to me is a classic picture. Here in the foreground, we have osprey chicks that our ecologists measure have 100 times the toxicity limit for mercury. And what do you see in the background of the picture? This is Missoula. This is where I ride my bike right past those every day, those coal trains. And so it's we have to not only quit burning coal in the U.S., we have to quit burning coal worldwide. And nothing could be more foolhardy than take our coal from here, go to all the trouble and expense and pollution of shipping it all the way to Asia, and then having them burn it, and literally the CO2 comes back in the atmosphere faster than the barge does. Okay? The atmosphere from China gets here in about 6 days, and I'll bet the barge doesn't get back in 6 days. And so we're literally just raining it right back down on ourselves as we sell coal to Asia. And so this really, I don't want to pick on Asia. Germany shut down their nuclear power plants with great fanfare. What wasn't said behind the scenes is then they turned on all their old coal plants. And so now Germany's coal emissions have gone up recently. Now they're trying hard to turn those back off, but I mean this is a worldwide principle I'm talking about. We got to quit burning coal everywhere. It's the oldest, I said it started in the 1850s, the oldest, most primitive, least efficient, dirtiest, most toxic fuel we have, and we don't even need it. The only reason we burn it is because it's cheap. And it's just, there's no use us doing any of our other energy efficiency things if we keep burning coal. I might as well take my Prius and just push it in the lake and go down to the Hummer dealer if we're going to keep burning coal. Oh, that's right, they went out of business. But I can't say it more emphatically. If we, and I mean we, the collective we of the whole world, does not quit burning coal, then nothing else we do matters. And the slide 3 or 4 back shows exactly why I say that. And for us in a state full of coal, this comes right home, because I realize that's easy money for the state that we have to step up and say that we're not interested in. And we better find the collective political courage to do it quick. One of the things that's interesting with Montana coal mining is it isn't even a very big part of our economy. This is statistics straight from the coal industry website, and it shows the fraction of, I can't even read it. Okay, this is the fraction of payroll, how much state payroll comes from coal mining. You can barely see the sliver. That's their contribution to the state tax base, and this is their fraction of total jobs in the state, and it's down less than 1%. This is not a big industry that Montana desperately needs, and they like to keep blowing that argument that how valuable they are to us. They're not valuable to us, and they're wrecking both the climate and the toxicity of the ecosystems. So the one career path I'm not recommending is going into the coal industry. I hope I've made that clear. And in fact, when I talk to tourism groups, I tell them, you know, we like to bask in this national reputation of the last best place. And of course, that brings tourists here every year. if our reputation becomes this industrial hall zone for the coal industry, how many tourists are going to come out here? And your reputation, what is it? Warren Buffett said it takes decades to build a reputation and you can lose it in 5 minutes. And we're asking to lose our last best place reputation the longer we fiddle around with coal mining. All right, got to move on. The end of cheap oil. This is 10 years old. This is the National Geographic from 10 years ago. One of the things we don't recognize as we pull up to the pump and gas up as easy as can be, and I do it too, is how much harder and harder and harder the oil industry is having to work to get that oil to us. The Gulf oil spill wouldn't have happened 10 years ago because they weren't drilling that deep 10 years ago. The tar sands wouldn't have happened 10 years ago because the tar sands, their break-even point is something like 90 bucks a barrel, and 10 years ago oil was 20 bucks a barrel. And so the oil industry is having to work harder and harder and harder to bring oil to us. We will never run out. There will always be some oil left. It's just the price will just march up forever. And the days of filling your car with gas for $2 like I did when I was in college are never going to be seen again. But you might be able to recharge your electric car for $2 sometime soon. So let's talk about future energy options. What are we going to do? It looks like things aren't that rosy in the fossil fuel industry. Well, it turns out we've got a lot of things we can work on. First thing I say, and the International Energy Agency says, we need to level the playing field. The reason coal is so cheap is because they have successfully for decades and decades and decades built in tax breaks and tax subsidies, and various loopholes are just riddled through our state tax code, our federal tax code, every which way. This one organization attempted to add up all the tax breaks of the fossil fuel industry for 1 year, and this amounted to $70 billion for fossil fuel, both oil, gas, coal, and for renewable energy about $12 billion. And so literally this is one of the energy agency's recommendations. There's some countries where, and I think for example India, the government subsidizes the price of gas so completely that it's something like 1/10 of the true market value that Indians pay for their gas. And so the first thing they are saying is we just need to get all these tax loopholes worldwide taken off, so the fossil fuel industry has to compete with every other energy source in a legitimate way, because right now they've got lots of favors done for them financially every which way you look. Now there's scenarios. This one came from the National Renewable Energy Lab just a couple of months ago that show that by 2050 we could taper down our fossil fuel use and fill that in with renewable energy, and with the technology that we already have today. We don't even have to invent anything new. But we have to get serious about starting down these paths, which we haven't really yet done in this country. We have no national energy policy at all, as you well know. You recognize 40 years is a long time. We don't have to do this overnight. We just have to get started. One of the things I see for the future will be almost a complete turnover of our electric power system from today. Right now we have only a couple of thousand huge power plants that provide electricity for the whole country. Okay, big coal plants, big nuclear plants, big hydropower dams. You know, the big thing is they're big. They're gigantic, and that means you need this big electric grid to service all of them. I imagine by 2050 it's going to be exactly upside down. Every little house might have its own little pico power plant. I've got 14 solar panels on my house, for example. There's no reason lots of other houses couldn't have the same. And places where it's windy, you could have some of these wind turbines. These are these vertical axle wind turbines. I haven't seen them. They're interesting to look at. I was coming through Shelby yesterday, and there was decked up probably the components for 100 new wind turbines up there in Shelby. They must be good. They were all stacked up. Of course, the propellers, you know what they are, and there was just a couple 100 yards worth of those just all stacked up in this field. So somebody's getting ready for a big deployment of new wind turbines up there. Little run-of-river power generators, where you don't build a reservoir, you simply put in effect a little propeller in the river, and as the river flows by, it spins it. These are things, they don't provide very much power, but it doesn't have to. This is kind of one of my favorite final slides. What if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? And I guess that's what a lot of this we know is we're creating a better world with all these things we're talking about. Even apart from the climate change topic alone, you just go down that list and it's a better world for everybody than the world we're in today.
Our next to last voice emanates from Bozeman. Bill Bryan is a founder and board member for One Montana, a non-governmental organization dedicated to bridging understanding between rural and urban interests in the state.
First of all, the issue of global warming and climate change has been something that has been created by the scientific community, those terms, to explain that our climate has become more variable. And how do we then react to it? And I think that what's been unfortunate about it is at one level, it's become a political issue. That it's like, do I believe in climate change? And if I do you believe that man's caused this climate change? Or whatever. It's that issue. Then you can fall into where there's a lot of people that for whatever reason don't believe in it and see this as a plot of some kind. And even in One Montana, we aren't really wanting to work and talk about the issue of climate change per se, but we want to deal with some of the realities that are going on. And I think that I talked with the executive director, this was a year or so ago, of the conservation districts in this state. And he had said to me, and I said, how do you handle this issue around the climate? He says, well, we just talk about the fact that climate is becoming far more variable, and we're trying to figure out how we adapt to it. And folks on the ground here know that there are changes going on. They're not as concerned about maybe what's creating those changes as much as how do I adjust, how do I adapt, how do I become more resilient to it. And when I have a son who's on the faculty at the University of Colorado, and he and I were at a bus stop in Boulder. This was before they had their flood. And I said something about, he said, Dad, don't get into that. And Father, there's always son wanting to make sure that Father does things a little differently, and they should be doing that. Is that he and I said, well, and then so I pushed him a little bit more, and he said, well, if you're going to get into it, get into talking about the social dimensions of it. And he told me, he said, first of all, read a book. So, and this is the book he told me to read, and this was called Why We Disagree About Climate Change. It's written by an Englishman. And he talks a lot about who we are as people. What are our core values? What are our beliefs? What do we fear? How do we handle risk management? How do we deal with technology and whatever? How do we deal with that? And he says, that's where we're really going to talk about this. And so the next thing I know, this person back to the head of the conservation districts and say, well, we're dealing with this, water is the issue for us. So we have gone from there. We did that report, but we had an intern work on just on the water issue. Well, the water issue, we have said, a lot of people, some people on our board have said, don't get into it. It's too complex. It's too important. It's too pervasive an issue. It's not something that you can just, with people who have been working on it for years, so on and so forth. Well, you then look at the issue and you can, yes, all of that's true. On the other hand, this is a semi-arid state. It's also a headwater state. Agriculture is our #1 industry. You can't have agriculture without water. And if there's going to be changes in water, and for those of us that are in agriculture, we've got to figure out how do you adjust to that, okay? And so when you get into that issue, yes, as people in agriculture say, first of all, we need to know what water we do have and what water we don't have. Then we also have got to, if you want us to get into, to be conserving of water, there's an issue in this state, and it's in some other Western states as well, and that is either you use the water you have or you lose it. So how do you conserve in this? How do you work on it? If that's the way if I've got 100 units of water and I've been convinced that I should figure out ways to be more conservative of our water. And so I do. And so now I'm only using 70 cents. And you, as my neighbor, know that I'm not using 30 units of my water. Now you want that. And so we've got there's some basic issues there that need to be dealt with. And who's telling us that? The scientists don't need to tell us that. They can help us create maybe an environment where we're discussing this, but it's the folks on the land. And when they look at this, water is what it's all about. And so what we did is that we just recently, we went to the climate scientists in the state, and we asked okay, communications is a big issue. Yes, it is. Okay, why don't we get some of you select who should come. Let's sit down and talk for a day with a communications specialist. We brought somebody from across the border, from Canada, and we had an invitation only with 18 scientists in the state, and we focused on this whole issue that if you want to talk with mainstream Montana or people on the ground in Montana about climate, let's talk about water. Let's talk about, okay, not only who owns the water, let's talk about the conservation issues around water, because ag is really interested in how much do I have and when can I use it? And I can only use it at certain times, and if it's not available then that's an issue for me. And they're trying to figure out ways to adjust. Okay, so we did that. And the next day, we took 6 of those scientists with the person from Canada, and we brought about 10 or 12 agricultural leaders in the state, and there were others that wanted to come, and there was some big conflicts so that they couldn't come, but people wanted to have this dialogue. And it was an amazing conversation using water to talk about how we're trying to adjust and where this is going. We didn't talk about, there weren't issues like this is all man-caused and we've got to go to a whole different way of how we use energy and types of energy. No, we didn't get into that. And then we came out of that where people who you would think in the state would have known one another because they're leaders in ag and they're leaders in the scientific community had never met one another. And then they left going like, maybe I should spend a day on your ranch. Maybe I should spend a day on your farm. And there was this, you can have this dialogue, but you've got language as an issue. And this is a little off the subject, but we're working on a feasibility study for the possibility of a meat processing plant in the state of Montana. And we're doing some market research, and what we found is that the consumer, yes, likes the idea that maybe they would get a Montana branded product, but they want to make sure that it's locally grown. Well, we weren't using the term, we had used the term sort of source verified. Well, the consumer didn't necessarily understand what that was, and so they almost dismissed that, even though the real value add for a lot of our food today is that it's locally grown, which if it's locally grown is another way of saying it's source verified, okay? And it's this language issue that we have to, because I have a PhD and all that sort of stuff, and it's so easy to get into using certain jargon that isn't the jargon of people in this state. Whether, I'll say Main Street, Montana. I don't want to just paint, talking about the difference between agriculture and the rest. No, let's talk about, Montanans. Many Montanans have a different language than some of us. And so one of the issues here, and what we've learned, is that, if we're going to talk about climate issues in this state, let's talk about it through water. A lot more people are going to be interested in that. A lot more people are going to say, you know what I'm doing. And what I find, what's interesting is that you take that and then you look at corporations, businesses on this issue. Let me give you 3 examples, 2 in Montana and 1 international. When the watershed councils all met in their annual meeting last November, they had 2 private sector people speak. One was Coca-Cola. And Coca-Cola is this international, global operation. And they just talked matter-of-factly about the issues that they have to deal with in their long-range planning. They've got to have a long view. And one of them is population, and the other has to do with climate. And why climate? Well, last I knew, that Coca-Cola and all of their products is a liquid, which means it's water-based, okay? So this is just a huge part of who they are going forward. A tiny company, but what's the Mountain Water that serves the Missoula's water? They just went out and says, we're dealing with the fact that the climate has really changed in the state. And we've got to, we look at this in a longer view here about where we're going to have water and when we're going to have it and all. We've got to really take into account that the climate has become far more variable. And just this week, I heard Dean Vogford of Wheat, Montana, give a talk about his business, and which is mainly dryland grain farming, wheat farming, and then he's done this great thing where you can actually, where it's processed, and then he's selling bread not only locally out here or in Montana, but I think there's even, I think you mentioned that there's many as 1,500 Walmart superstore grocery stores that also are carrying his brand. And he then just said right away, he says, one of the things we've got to deal with, he said, we just have to figure out how to adjust to this. But the climate has changed. We used to do most of our wheat harvesting, for example, in the middle of August. Now it's the first part of August, and now it's actually creeping into late July. That gives you an example that we're having to figure out ways to adjust. We're having to figure out ways to adjust the types of grains that we're growing and whatever. So here you have, and my feeling is that many in the private sector are already dealing with this, but they've got their own language. So let's figure that out. Let's go from where they're coming from to talk about, if we're going to talk about climate in this state, you can't hammer it in. It's got to come from, you've got to use the language that is, that is inclusive to most Montanans, and water is the way to go. Water is the issue. How much do I have? And can I have it when I need it? And so, and if I can't, then how do I adjust? How do I adapt?
Finally, we're back here in the state capitol for a welcome opportunity to hear from members of a foreign delegation who spoke to us about what's going on in their countries to adjust to climate change.
I'm from Israel. We're working towards our target of reducing 20% of our CO2 emissions to the atmosphere up till 2020. We hope to make that big effort and to meet our targets. We're doing that through using natural gas and through renewable energies. We should all join to the same effort.
Hello, I'm from Hungary. Climate change is affecting us a lot in recent years and getting stronger and stronger. So people and politicians start to realize the real risks and effects. So that's why we have started some adaptation measures, but until now, as part of the European Union, we mostly did mitigation. So we are trying to introduce more renewable energy into our energy system, and we are trying to reduce energy consumption through energy efficient measures.
Hi, I'm from Thailand. In Thailand, we realized climate change a lot, and at the moment, we try to enhance our use of renewable energy, like biodiesel, bioethanol, and biomass, and hopefully that will help. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Seth Mahu. I'm from Ghana, a small country on the west coast of Africa. We are equally affected by the effects of climate change. One of the things we are doing to really adjust to climate change is to promote a law that does not allow any oil exploration company in my country to flare gas. And we are also promoting renewable energy to augment the use of or reduce the dependency on fossil fuels. Thank you.
Hello, I am from Oman. We are concerned about the climate change, and we are doing a lot of programs in renewable energies and reduction of carbon emissions, because we are using a lot of diesels and gases there in the country. So the target is to be 25% of using clean energy, especially the solars and wind, to reduce the carbon emissions in the air in the country. That's it.
It's time now, once again, for Just a Minute for Human Rights.
3, 2. Human rights to me is it's an inherent right for all human beings, despite your your sex, your religion, or your origin. Basically, what human rights is to treat any human being with respect, dignity, and the fairness that you yourself would want to be treated with. And I think human rights aren't only rights in themselves, but it's also a responsibility as human beings to make sure that people, no matter who they are or where they're from, are getting treated with this amount of respect and dignity and fairness. And yeah, that was all I had.
And that'll do it.